I was listening to Intercepted because my former boss and colleague, Ryan Grimm, interviewed Pramila Jayapal again. And I was interested to see what she was going to say about the controversy around the $15 minimum wage not being included in the bill. Because if you recall, she also went on Intercepted following the first force the vote kerfuffle back in early January to give her rationale for why progressives didn't use the power that they held to withhold their vote for Nancy Pelosi in exchange for any number of concessions. If you recall, they claim that they got pay-go exemptions and certain committee appointments. But of course, anything that they claim to have gotten, they could have gotten that plus more by actually forcing the vote and withholding something from Nancy Pelosi. There was a lot that Nancy Pelosi could give in her individual personal discretion, including delegating hearing time for a vote on Medicare for all. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Getting rid of Richie Neal on the Ways and Means Committee, guaranteeing committee appointments that fell through. We all remember that AOC didn't get the appointments that she wanted, that Katie Porter was kicked off the Financial Services Committee. We've covered all of that on the show, right? So now that the $15 minimum wage situation has just been foregrounded, I wanted to see if we got any clarity on what the rationale was for progressives in the House not holding up the COVID bill to make sure that the one structural long-term part of the bill that existed, which is to raise the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. We are in the longest period in American history since we got a minimum wage in 1938, during which we haven't had a minimum wage raise. If we were to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it would pull 50% of Black Americans out of poverty. It would have all these amazing downstream effects. And of course, it is enormously popular as well. A new poll says that 8 in 10 Americans think the federal minimum wage is too low, and 2/3 support increasing it to $15 an hour. That's all Americans, not Democrats. Obviously, the number among Democrats is exponentially higher.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing, often polls, I'm sorry if this is sidetracking a little bit, but often when we talk about polls like this that show 2/3 support Medicare for all, one of the more pessimistic responses to that information is, okay, but that's people saying that without hearing the negative messaging. And once they hear, this is going to increase your taxes, it's going to, cause waiting lines in the doctor's office or whatever, whether that's true or false, then public support will go down, which, for some issues that is absolutely true. But I think for something like a $15 minimum wage, okay, people have heard the freaking arguments by now.
Right, but also when people say that about Medicare for all, it's like, yes, if I tell you I'm going to serve you a gourmet meal and then poop on the side, you're going to say you don't want the gourmet meal. It's my job to do counter messaging that says, actually, there's no poop on the side.
Absolutely.
Actually, they're misrepresenting reality. Actually, your taxes are only going to go up less than what you're paying right now in premiums. And there's never, obviously, it's a discourse that's
Absolutely.
ongoing. And it's our job to keep arguing for the thing. If you are a leftist who is like, oh, well, someone's going to say something negative about Medicare for all that's going to change people's poll responses. Therefore, I guess it's not that popular anyway. I'm sorry. You need to really reevaluate what side you're on.
My point is, when it comes to something like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, we're past the discourse point.
Yeah.
There's no amount of messaging that's going to get that down. That massive support for raising the minimum wage down.
The argument that was being made in February, when all of this was still an unresolved, ongoing concern, was that, okay, sure, 88% of Democrats or whatever it was support it, but it goes down to in the 70s when you hear it's being done through budget reconciliation. And it's like, first of all, that's still a super high number.
Yeah.
And also, people don't know what budget reconciliation is. Have you had the conversation about what it means? Because Democrats like Biden have been out here doing a full court press acting like the parliamentarian is the Pope and we just have to respect her edict and that there's some kind of constitutional gravitas to this thing. So of course people are going to be like, well, I guess this is breaking the rules for us to slip it in this way. No, it's your job to explain that the parliamentarian is nobody. And the only precedent that exists is that there's someone who can be ignored, fired, overruled at the convenience of the person who's sitting in the Oval Office.
I'm still shocked that that number goes down once you bring up the specter of overruling the parliamentarian.
I think,
like, well, what kind of freaking loser is like, yeah, I support $50 minimum wage. Wait, we're doing it through reconciliation? Hold the phone. That's a bridge too far for me.
It's the woman I ran past yesterday on the mall with her Bartlett for America shirt, who's like, this seems like a good idea. Lessening poverty by 50% among one of the most disenfranchised groups in the country sounds like kind of a good idea, but is it allowed?
It's those people. Like that 10% entirely comes from the District of Columbia in Northern Virginia. It's people who own mugs that say I'm a Cuomo-sexual and they don't live in New York.
100%. So should we hear what, wait, before we get to the tape, I also want to remind listeners that we were able to have Ro Khanna on the show. And we asked him a similar series of questions. This was before Ish went down, right? This was in the lead up to the voting. But what he said really plainly was he was not willing to hold up the bill. He did not think that COVID relief should be held up because it did not include a $15 minimum wage. Mm-hmm. The rationale being that there was too much good stuff in it, that it would be helpful to people, and that it wasn't the tacit statement is that it's not worth the political risk. Although no one, I think, really says it out loud, because I think it's obvious that for all of these Democrats in like deeply blue districts who are overwhelmingly popular with a national profile, there is no actual immediate risk to them losing their seat, and certainly not to them losing their seat to a Republican.
Is he referring to the risk that the bill won't pass, period?
No. That's part of it. So part of it is, I just want people to have nice things, and there's too much political, I don't want to not be responsible for this bill passing. But why aren't you? I mean, you can say it's just because I, in my heart, care for the people, but part of it is I don't want the political blame for not letting this relief get to the people. I think that both of those things are mixed up in there. All right. Okay, let's roll the tape.
One last question about the COVID relief bill. There was a lot of pressure from the outside on the Progressive Caucus and on the Squad to draw a hard line and say that if the $15 minimum wage isn't in this bill, that we're voting this down. From your perspective, was that debated inside the caucus, and was there a line at which the caucus would have said we're voting this down, and why wasn't that particular issue the line?
Yeah. With the $15 minimum wage, I can tell you from the very beginning, we knew that was a 50-50 proposition, that getting the parliamentarian to rule 15 in was a 50-50 proposition. But then because the White House had been so clear that they were not going to overrule the parliamentarian, even though you saw me on TV, I assume, every day pushing to overrule the parliamentarian, that it would be a very difficult thing to try to move forward as our red line. So even Alexandria, Ro Khanna, others had said they weren't going to vote down a progressive, truly progressive, probably the most progressive legislation most of us have ever voted on, because 15 wasn't in there. That would make no sense, because the overall problem is we still don't have 50 senators who were willing to vote for it. You saw Senator Sanders' amendment. I think we lost 8 senators, Democratic senators, on that amendment.
What this amounts to is a kind of admission that the real issue here is that they know that Joe Biden doesn't back a $15 minimum wage. Because what comes out in the course of this episode, I don't know if it's before or after this, but she says at one point that House progressives threatened to hold up the bill in exactly this way over the extended unemployment benefits. That Joe Manchin wanted to further diminish the boosted unemployment benefits, and that they said, no, we're drawing a line in the sand, and Joe Manchin capitulated over that. So Ryan's question is, okay, why not do that for the $15 minimum wage? And her answer is, well, we didn't know if the parliamentarian was going to rule in our favor. We didn't know if Joe Biden was going to back this. Because we all remember, right? Joe Biden puts out there in the world that, I think the parliamentarian is going to rule against this. Then the parliamentarian, magically, who could have predicted, ruled against it. And then, as David Sirota explained on our live stream a couple of weeks back, the posture of this could have been that regardless of what the parliamentarian does, it stays in the bill, right? Because Chuck Schumer voluntarily took the $15 minimum wage out of the Senate bill. The bill that passed the House had the $15 minimum wage in it. Chuck Schumer, after the parliamentarian's ruling, strips it out of the bill. Okay? At which point, Bernie Sanders brings an amendment to put it back into the bill. And that's the vote that failed. Not an actual vote on the $15 minimum wage, but the vote to put it back into the amendment, put it back into the bill. And that required 60 votes to get back in. If Chuck Schumer, this is what David Sirota was explaining to us, if Chuck Schumer had not taken the $15 minimum wage out of the bill, then a Republican could have brought an amendment saying, we want to take it out of the bill. But they would have needed 60 votes to do that.
Right.
Which Republicans also would not have had. So it would have been in the bill, and now Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin would have been in a position where they actually have to vote down the entire COVID relief bill on the basis that they object to a $15 minimum wage, which people in their districts and nationwide overwhelmingly like.
So do you lay the failure primarily at the doorstep of Joe Biden?
100%.
Who did, before the parliamentarian even ruled, who had this white flag posture in public, say, I don't know, we'll try, but
100%.
Who's to say? Probably won't happen.
100%. And this is why I'm frustrated, and this is why I'm a little frustrated with the progressives as well, because when Jayapal says, I was willing to go to the mat for an aspect of this plan, one aspect of this plan, the boosted uninsurance, but not another $15 minimum wage. And the reason is not Joe Manchin, right? So much of the conversation has been about Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. But Joe Manchin didn't want the boosted unemployment either. And Jayapal saying, we would have held it up. We would have gone to the mat. We would have fought Joe Manchin over this. We would have said, no, we're not going to vote for this bill unless it has this in it, over the boosted unemployment. But not for a $15 minimum wage, because it wasn't actually about going toe-to-toe with Joe Manchin and thinking you could win. Thinking you could win the public battle, thinking you could win the battle in the press, thinking that you could negotiate with him and thinking you could beat him. She believed she could do that with respect to boosted unemployment. She did not believe she could do that with respect to a $15 minimum wage because it wasn't just a fight against Joe Manchin. It was a fight against the Biden administration.
Yeah. And because the parliamentarian's ruling gave too many outs for people who are squishy on the minimum wage. It gave too easy a way to vote against it, which means that, I do think that, once you got to the parliamentarian point, okay, that was it. The fight was pretty much done.
Right.
Because even Joe Biden, because as someone like Manchin, even if, let's say the parliamentarian had ruled that was in order, and Manchin still held it up, and he was still the one vote saying, I'm queasy about a $15 minimum wage. If you forced him to vote that down, I think he does pay some kind of political cost for that. But if he gets the out of the parliamentarian saying it's out of order, it's not covered by the Byrd rule, then he can vote it down and say, well, no, gosh, I just did that because of, process reasons, because it would have been, it would have violated the order of things,
right?
Or
so
whatever the bullshit they say.
This hand in glove relationship between the Blue Dog Democrats and these administrations who say, okay, the Blue Dogs are going to provide cover and vote down all of these good things, these big structural changes that Americans want. At the same time, we're going to give them a little bit of procedural cover so everyone can pretend like nobody's hands are clean. And this is why I keep harping on this. I was heartened by the extent to which even more moderate liberals seemed disappointed about what happened with the $15 minimum wage. The $15 minimum wage is part of the Democratic Party platform. This is not some radical Bernie agenda point. Okay? Literally, when Bernie Sanders conceded to Joe Biden and they gave that painful Zoom call, the first thing that Bernie brought up and the most central thing that he emphasized was, you're going to get us a $15 minimum wage, right? And Joe Biden, in retrospect, sat there and lied through his teeth and said, yes, I swear on my word as a Biden. He didn't literally say that, but, gave his, promise with his chest that he was going to shepherd this thing through. And what is very clear when you look at the timeline is that he did everything conceivable to prevent there from being a vote on a $15 minimum wage. Everything conceivable. And I think that even the moderates need to be really clear-eyed about where the blame lies, because this could be a really radicalizing moment for a lot of Democrats who take for granted that, well, Biden's doing his best. You know, like what we heard through the entire Obama administration. I like Obama. He's a good guy. If he couldn't get this done, it must have been because it was impossible. Oh, gosh, Lieberman, what's he to do? He's the leader of the free world, but I guess there's nothing he can offer Joe Lieberman so that we can freaking get health care, you know? And there's got to come a moment where we properly attribute blame. And when you have even Jayapal in this moment doing this little dance, that it itself obscures the truth. That the reason she didn't hold up the vote on $15 minimum wage is because of Joe Biden and his administration, not because of an unwillingness to go toe-to-toe with Joe Manchin. That helps ultimately the fiction advance.
So where do we go from here?
That's the question I'm supposed to ask of our guests, because it's difficult. It's difficult to answer.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, I mean,
well, I mean, like that really is the main question. Okay, so apparently, most of these actors involved, including Joe Biden, say, "Well, we're going to try again. You know, we're gonna get something at some point." Which, you know, it is a profound moral systemic failing that the minimum wage will remain at $7.25 an hour.
Yep.
At federal level, you know, through like at minimum the end of this year,
right?
Even in the most, you know, optimistic scenarios where they pass a minimum wage hike, it's still going to take time to actually come in. I mean, theoretically, the votes are there to get something like a lower minimum wage hike. Which there is a debate about whether, you know, we should take that, you know, whether the left should take that. But I think right now, with the control of the Senate, you know, with Joe Manchin's party in control of the Senate, by which I mean just Joe Manchin in control of the Senate, I think, you know, I would take 12 over 725.
Yeah, so that is a really interesting point, Virgil, because again, look at the posture of this. And I'm sorry to be like so in this. I'm writing about it right now, so this is what my brain is attached to. When we were having a conversation about the amount of the checks, there was a negotiation. So 14, is it 2,000? Okay. When we were having a conversation about what the unemployment benefit boost should be, is it going to be 300 or 400, or 300 for a longer period of time, 400 for a shorter period of time? It was a negotiation about the amount. Right? But pretending that there was this procedural obstacle cut off any potential negotiation around the level of the minimum wage.
Yeah, exactly.
It was an absolute bar to any further discourse, which is strategically brilliant if you do not want to raise the minimum wage, right? Because Kristen Sinema, of course, we all know, has supported minimum wage increases.
Yeah.
Joe Manchin, in the context of this very conversation, said, well, I'd be for an $11 minimum wage.
Yeah, and he's already set the floor.
He's already set the floor. And as insulting as that is, and as much as I don't think we should settle for that, as much as I think that if Democrats really cared, they would have been pushing for a $24, and then maybe we could be settling on a $15.
Sure.
I think it's important to note that the possibility of negotiation was there if it was just about Manchin and Sinema.
Yes. Yeah.
But again, the Biden administration very adeptly cut that off at the pass, which I think reflects, it's more evidence that they had no sincere commitment at all to a $15 minimum wage. And that we need to place the blame where it lies and not, I mean, I'm certainly not playing, I'm playing the world's smallest violin for Manchin and Sinema, but like they are truly the scapegoats in this whole kerfuffle. And the blame really should be put at Joe Biden's feet. Because when you do that, you also realize that it's not going to, you're foolish to think it's going to be any different during the next budget reconciliation process, and even more foolhardy to think that we're necessarily even going to have the chambers of Congress, majorities in the chambers of Congress next time around after that.
Yeah, no, they will not. But that's exactly it. Because if the parliamentary made the ruling, the White House came right out with a statement saying, okay, well, you know, thanks for your advice, but we're going in a different direction on this one, then it's still on the table. Then we're still negotiating it.
Right.
Then it's still, you know, turning the screws.
Right.
But the fact that they capitulate right out the gate, you know, it's very telling. I think you're completely right about it.